The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Chez Laurent, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, where a single meal cost more than most people earned in a week. Victoria Sterling sat alone at her usual corner table, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a crystal wine glass, watching the droplets race down the glass like tears she'd forgotten how to shed. At 52, Victoria had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a successful investment firm, and a reputation that opened doors across the city. Yet tonight, like so many others, she felt hollow. The expensive meal before her had grown cold, untouched, as her mind wandered to places she'd trained herself not to go. "Excuse me." "Ma'am?" The small voice barely registered above the restaurant's soft jazz music. Victoria looked up, expecting to see a server, but instead found herself staring into the most extraordinary green eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a little girl, no more than 8 years old, whose clothes hung like rags on her tiny frame. Her auburn hair was matted and dirty, and her face bore the premature wisdom that only hardship could teach. Can I eat your leftovers?" the child whispered, her voice trembling with both hunger and embarrassment. "I promise I won't make a mess." The restaurant fell silent. Other diners turned to stare, some with disgust, others with pity. The maitre d' rushed forward, his face flushed with mortification. "Miss Sterling, I am so terribly sorry. Security will remove her immediately." "No!" Victoria's voice cut through the air like ice. Something about this child had struck her in a place she'd thought was dead. "It's fine, Henri. Please let her stay." And the little girl looked up with surprise, those green eyes wide with disbelief. Victoria studied her face more carefully, and a strange sensation washed over her. Recognition without understanding, a pull she couldn't explain. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Victoria asked gently, pushing her untouched plate toward the child. "Emma," the girl replied, her small hands reaching eagerly for the food. As she ate with desperate hunger, Victoria noticed something that made her breath catch. Around the child's neck hung a tiny silver locket, tarnished and barely visible beneath the dirt, but unmistakably familiar. Victoria's hand instinctively moved to her throat, where an identical locket had once rested. Her heart began to race as memories she'd buried deep began clawing their way to the surface. The shape of Emma's face, those eyes, even the way she tilted her head when she spoke. "Emma," Victoria said carefully, "how long have you been on the streets?" "Since I was 5, Emma replied between bites, as if homelessness was the most natural thing in the world. "My foster mom said I was too much trouble." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. As Emma continued eating, Victoria's mind raced through calculations, dates, possibilities that seemed impossible yet felt undeniably true. "Do you know anything about your birth parents?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Emma shook her head sadly. "The lady at the foster home said my mum didn't want me, that she gave me away because I wasn't good enough." Victoria's wineglass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the marble floor. But she barely noticed the sound or the concerned murmurs from other tables. All she could see was this beautiful broken child who might be. "Emma," she said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't suppress, "would you like to come home with me tonight? Just for a warm bed and a proper meal?" Emma looked up, hope flickering in those familiar green eyes. "You really mean it?" But as Victoria nodded, unable to trust her voice, she caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold. There, partially hidden by Emma's torn sleeve, was a distinctive birthmark, a small crescent moon shape on her left wrist. Victoria's world tilted on its axis. She had the same birthmark, in the exact same place. As the restaurant bustled around them, cleaning up broken glass and whispering about the strange scene, Victoria stared at the child who had just asked for her leftovers. The child, who might be the daughter she'd been told, died 18 years ago in a hospital fire. The daughter she'd never stopped grieving. The ride to Victoria's penthouse was silent, except for the gentle hum of the Mercedes and Emma's quiet sniffles. The child sat pressed against the window, staring up at the towering buildings with wonder, her small hands clutching the takeout container Henri had insisted on packing with extra food. "I've never been in a car this nice," Emma whispered, running her fingers along the leather seats. "It's softer than any bed I've ever slept in." Victoria's heart clenched. Every word from this child seemed designed to break down the walls she'd spent decades building. As they pulled into the underground garage of her building, Victoria noticed Emma's eyes growing wide with disbelief. "You live here?" Emma asked, as the elevator climbed to the 42nd floor. "Like, all by yourself?" "Yes," Victoria replied simply, though the word felt heavier than it ever had before. All by yourself. How those words had haunted her through the years. When the elevator doors opened directly into Victoria's penthouse, Emma's gasp echoed through the marble foyer. The space was immaculate, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, modern art that cost more than most houses, furniture that belonged in magazines. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly lifeless. "Is this real?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible as she took tentative steps into the living room. "Very real," Victoria said, watching the child's face. "Emma, when was the last time you had a proper bath?" Emma's cheeks flushed red. I try to clean up in public restrooms when I can, but it's been a while since." "Come on," Victoria said gently, leading her toward the guest bathroom. "Let's get you cleaned up, and then we'll find you something comfortable to wear." As the bathtub filled with warm water, Victoria found herself studying Emma's reflection in the mirror. Without the dirt and grime, the resemblance was even more striking. The shape of her nose, the curve of her smile. Even the way she moved her hands when she spoke, it was like looking at a ghost from her past. While Emma bathed, Victoria rummaged through her closet, finding an old Harvard sweatshirt that would be enormous on the child, but warm and soft. When Emma emerged from the bathroom, clean and glowing, Victoria had to grip the doorframe to steady herself. "You look beautiful," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Emma beamed, then grew serious. "Mrs. I don't know your name." "Victoria, you can call me Victoria." "Victoria," Emma repeated carefully. "Why are you being so nice to me? Most people just pretend they don't see me." Victoria knelt down to Emma's level, looking into those extraordinary green eyes. "Because everyone deserves kindness, Emma, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I have a feeling you and I are going to be very important to each other." As they sat in the living room sharing hot chocolate, Emma's eyelids began to droop. Victoria had prepared the guest room, but found herself reluctant to let the child out of her sight. "Victoria?" Emma murmured sleepily. "Do you think my real mom ever thinks about me?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. "I'm sure she does, sweetheart. I'm sure she thinks about you every single day." As Emma finally drifted off to sleep on the couch, Victoria carefully removed the tarnished locket from around her neck. With trembling fingers, she opened it, revealing a tiny photograph inside. So faded and damaged, it was barely recognizable. But Victoria would know that face anywhere. It was her own, 18 years younger, holding a newborn baby. Victoria's hands shook as she stared at the impossible proof before her. The baby she'd been told died in a hospital fire. The daughter she'd grieved for nearly 2 decades. Somehow, impossibly, that baby had survived. But how? And why had she been told Emma was dead? Victoria spent the night pacing her study. The opened locket on her desk, like evidence of a crime she was only beginning to understand. Every few minutes, she checked on Emma, who slept peacefully in the guest room, finally looking like the child she should have been allowed to be. At dawn, Victoria made the first call she dreaded and needed in equal measure. Marcus, it's Victoria. I need you to run a background check, full investigation, everything you can find. She gave her private investigator Emma's information, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. Victoria, it's 6 in the morning. This must be important, Marcus replied, his voice rough with sleep. More important than you can imagine. I need this by tonight, Marcus, whatever it costs. After hanging up, Victoria found Emma awake, sitting by the windows and staring out at Central Park in wonder. I've never seen so many trees from up high, Emma said softly. It's like being a bird. Victoria sat beside her, studying the child's profile. In the morning light, the resemblance was undeniable. Emma, do you remember anything about when you were very small, before the foster homes? Emma frowned, concentrating. Sometimes I have dreams. There's a lady with yellow hair like yours, and she's singing to me. But everyone says it's just my imagination. Victoria's breath caught. She'd sung to her baby every night during her pregnancy, dreaming of lullabies they'd share. What does she sing? Something about stars, Emma said dreamily. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. But different words. Victoria's world tilted. She'd made up her own version of the song, changing the words to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Heart. Mommy loves you from the start, a song no one else would know. Emma, Victoria said carefully, tell me about the locket. Where did it come from? Emma's hand went protectively to her throat. It's the only thing I have from before. The foster lady said it was around my neck when they found me. She tried to take it away, lots of times. But I hid it. Found you? Where were you found? In a hospital parking lot when I was really little. Some nurse found me in a car. I was really sick, they said. Almost died. Emma's voice grew smaller. The foster lady always said my real mum must have dumped me there because she didn't want a sick baby. Victoria felt sick herself. The timeline was adding up in ways that made her furious and heartbroken in equal measure. Emma, what hospital? St. Mary's. That's what the lady said. St. Mary's. The same hospital where Victoria had given birth, where she'd been told her daughter died in a fire that apparently never happened. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Found something. You need to see this. Can you meet me in an hour? Emma, Victoria said, trying to keep her voice calm. I need to go out for a little while. Would you like to come with me? Or would you prefer to stay here? There's food in the kitchen and you can watch anything you want on TV. Emma's eyes widened with panic. You're coming back, right? You're not going to leave me too? The question broke Victoria's heart. She knelt down and took Emma's small hands in hers. I promise you, Emma, I will never leave you. You're safe here, and I'll be back before lunch. An hour later, Victoria sat across from Marcus in a small cafe. Her hands wrapped around a coffee cup to stop them from shaking. Marcus, a grizzled former detective with 20 years of experience, looked like he'd seen a ghost. Victoria, I've been doing this job for a long time, but this case... He shook his head and slid a manila folder across the table. This is either the biggest coincidence I've ever seen, or someone went to great lengths to cover something up. Victoria opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents, photographs, and hospital records that made her blood run cold. Emma Rodriguez, that's the name on her birth certificate, was found outside St. Mary's Hospital 8 years ago. But here's the thing, Marcus leaned forward. The records show she was brought in as a Jane Doe infant 18 years ago, treated for smoke inhalation, and then the trail goes cold for 10 years. Smoke inhalation? Victoria whispered. From the hospital fire? That's just it, Marcus said grimly. I checked. There was no hospital fire 18 years ago, none. Someone created that story. Victoria's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. There, in black and white, was proof that her daughter had been alive all along. But who had taken her? And why? There's more, Marcus continued. I found the doctor who treated her originally, Dr. Margaret Chen. She's retired now, but she remembered the case. Said it was the strangest thing. A baby with smoke inhalation but no fire. And then social services came and took her away with sealed adoption papers. Sealed adoption papers, Victoria repeated. Marcus, I never signed any adoption papers. I was told she died. Marcus met her eyes with the grim expression of a man who'd seen too much corruption in his career. Someone with serious power and money made your daughter disappear, Victoria. The question is who and why they're letting her surface now. As Victoria drove home, her mind raced with possibilities, each more frightening than the last. But when she walked into her penthouse and saw Emma curled up on the couch reading one of her books, one thing became crystal clear. She would protect this child with her life, and she would find out who had stolen 18 years from both of them. That evening, as Emma slept peacefully in the guest room, Victoria sat in her study, surrounded by documents and memories she'd tried to forget. She pulled out a wooden box from her desk drawer, a box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were the few mementos from her pregnancy, ultrasound photos, a hospital bracelet, and a letter she'd written to her unborn daughter. The letter was dated 3 days before Emma's birth, filled with hopes and dreams for their future together. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she read her younger self's words. I promise to protect you always, my little star. Nothing in this world will ever separate us. How naive she'd been. How utterly unprepared for the betrayal that was coming. Victoria's mind drifted back to that horrible night 18 years ago. She'd been alone when the labor started. The baby's father, Richard Blackwood, had made it clear that her pregnancy was an inconvenience to his political career. He was a married senator, 20 years her senior, and their affair had been a mistake that cost her everything. The delivery had been difficult. Emma, though she didn't know her name then, had been born premature, her tiny lungs struggling with each breath. Victoria remembered holding her for just a few precious moments before the doctors rushed her away. We need to get her to the NICU immediately, Dr. Peterson had said. She's in respiratory distress. Victoria had been weak, exhausted, but fighting to stay conscious. Is she going to be okay? We're doing everything we can, he'd assured her. That was the last time Victoria saw her daughter alive, or so she'd been told. The next morning, Dr. Peterson had entered her room with tears in his eyes. Miss Sterling, I'm so sorry. There was a fire in the NICU early this morning. We couldn't save her. Victoria's world had shattered. She demanded to see the body, but was told it was too damaged, that it would only cause her more pain. In her grief, she'd believed them. Richard had arranged everything after that. The funeral, the cremation, even the therapy. Looking back now, Victoria realized how convenient it had all been. How quickly he'd wanted her to move on and forget this unfortunate chapter. Victoria's phone rang, pulling her from the painful memories. It was Marcus. Victoria, I've been digging deeper. You need to hear this. His voice was urgent. I found someone willing to talk, a nurse who worked at St. Mary's 18 years ago. She remembers your case. What did she say? She said there was never a fire. And she remembers Dr. Peterson acting strange the night your baby was born. She saw him talking to a well-dressed man in the hallway, someone who didn't belong in the maternity ward. Victoria's blood ran cold. Did she describe the man? Tall, silver hair, expensive suit. She said she heard them talking about taking care of the problem and making sure it never comes back to haunt him. Richard. It had to be Richard. There's more, Marcus continued. I tracked down Dr. Peterson. He's living in Florida now, retired. Victoria, the man is dying. Terminal cancer. His conscience has been eating at him for years. He wants to talk. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the walls of deception finally beginning to crumble. Set up a meeting. I need to hear what he has to say. After hanging up, Victoria walked quietly to Emma's room. The child was sleeping peacefully, her auburn hair spread across the pillow like silk. In sleep, she looked even more like the baby Victoria had held for those brief, precious moments. "I'm going to find out what happened to us," Victoria whispered. "And I'm going to make sure whoever did this pays for every day we lost." But as she turned to leave, Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring words that made Victoria's heart stop. "Please don't take me away from my mommy again. Please, I'll be good." Even in sleep, Emma was still fighting battles that an 8-year-old should never have to face. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking the child's hair. "No one will ever take you away again," she promised. "I won't let them." But even as she made the promise, Victoria knew that revealing the truth would be dangerous. Whoever had orchestrated this cover-up had powerful connections and a lot to lose. They wouldn't give up easily. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging into the past or the child disappears again. This is your only warning." Victoria's hands trembled as she read the message. Someone was watching them. Someone knew exactly what she'd discovered. But instead of fear, Victoria felt a rage she'd never experienced before. They'd already stolen 18 years from her and Emma. She wouldn't let them steal another day. The next morning brought unexpected challenges. Victoria had called in sick to work for the first time in a decade, unable to bear the thought of leaving Emma alone after the threatening text. As they sat together at breakfast, Victoria noticed Emma picking at her food, her usual appetite gone. "Are you feeling okay, sweetheart?" Victoria asked gently. Emma looked up with those expressive green eyes, now filled with worry. "Victoria, last night I heard you talking on the phone. Are you in trouble because of me?" The question caught Victoria off guard. This child, who'd survived on the streets for 3 years, had developed an acute sense for danger. Victoria realized she couldn't hide the truth completely. Emma was too smart and too experienced with adult deception. "There are some people who might not want us to be together," Victoria said carefully. "But that doesn't mean we're going to let them win." "Is it because I'm not good enough?" Emma's voice was small, heartbreaking. "The foster lady always said, that's why nobody wanted to keep me, because I'm damaged goods." Victoria felt a surge of protective fury. She knelt beside Emma's chair, taking the child's hands in hers. "Emma, listen to me very carefully. You are not damaged. You are not unwanted. You are the most precious, brave, amazing little girl I've ever met. Anyone who made you feel otherwise was wrong." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. "But why does everyone always leave me?" "Not everyone," Victoria said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I have an idea." "How would you like to help me solve a mystery?" Emma's eyes brightened with curiosity. "What kind of mystery?" "Well," Victoria said, "I'm trying to find out about a little girl who disappeared a long time ago. Someone very important to me. I think you might be able to help because you're very smart and notice things other people miss." Emma sat up straighter, clearly intrigued. "What happened to her?" "Some bad people took her away from her family and made everyone think she was gone forever. But I think she might still be out there somewhere." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the serious expression of someone far older than her years. Do you think maybe I could help because I know what it's like to be lost?" Victoria's heart nearly broke at the wisdom in those words. "I think you could help because you're strong and brave, and you understand things that most people don't." Their conversation was interrupted by the building's concierge calling to announce a visitor. "Miss Sterling, there's a Dr. Margaret Chen here to see you. She says it's urgent." Victoria's pulse quickened. Dr. Chen was the retired Dr. Marcus had mentioned, the one who'd treated Emma as an infant. "Send her up immediately." Within minutes, an elderly Asian woman with kind eyes and silver hair stood in Victoria's foyer. Dr. Chen looked around the elegant space before her gaze settled on Emma, who was peeking out from behind Victoria with natural wariness. "My goodness," Dr. Chen whispered, her hand going to her heart. "After all these years." "Dr. Chen," Victoria said, "this is Emma." "Emma, this is Dr. Chen. She's a doctor who might be able to help us with our mystery." Emma stepped forward, ever polite despite her caution. "Nice to meet you, Dr. Chen." Dr. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "Child, do you have any birthmarks? Perhaps on your wrist?" Emma looked puzzled but rolled up her sleeve, revealing the crescent-shaped mark. Dr. Chen gasped. "I remember you," she said softly. "You were so tiny, so fragile. I was the one who treated you when you were brought in as a baby." Victoria sat down heavily, the confirmation hitting her like a physical blow. "Dr. Chen, what really happened that night?" The older woman looked at Emma, then at Victoria. "Perhaps the child should—" "No," Emma said firmly. "If this is about me, I want to know. I'm tired of adults deciding what I can and can't handle." Victoria looked at Emma with admiration. "She's right. Emma deserves to know the truth." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Very well. 18 years ago, a baby was brought to our hospital with smoke inhalation. Not from a fire, from being in a car with the engine running in a closed garage. Someone had tried to." She paused, glancing at Emma. "Someone tried to hurt the baby," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I understand?" "Yes," Dr. Chen continued. "But the baby survived. She was strong, a fighter. I treated her for several days, and she was getting better. Then one night, 2 men came. They had official-looking papers, said they were from social services. They took the baby, and I was told to falsify the records, to say she had died." "Who were these men?" Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew. "One was young, nervous. The other was older, well-dressed. Spoke with authority. He said it was a matter of national security, that people's lives depended on the cover-up. I was young then, frightened. I thought I was protecting people." Victoria's hands clenched into fists. Richard Blackwood's influence had reached even into the hospital, corrupting good people into participating in his crime. "But," Dr. Chen continued, "I kept copies of everything, the real records, photos, even a DNA sample. I knew someday the truth would need to come out." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "These belong to you both." As Victoria opened the envelope with shaking hands, Emma moved closer to her side. The first item was a photograph. Victoria holding a newborn baby, both of them exhausted but peaceful. The baby was unmistakably Emma. "That's you," Emma whispered in wonder, pointing to Victoria. "And that's me." The second item was a DNA test result, dated 18 years ago, conclusively proving the biological relationship between Victoria Sterling and baby Jane Doe. Victoria looked down at Emma, who was staring at the photograph with tears streaming down her face. "Does this mean—" Emma started, her voice breaking. "It means," Victoria said, pulling Emma into her arms, "that I'm your mother. And I've been looking for you your whole life, without even knowing you were alive." Emma collapsed into Victoria's embrace, 18 years of longing finally finding their answer in that moment. But even as they held each other, Victoria knew their reunion was only the beginning. Someone powerful had orchestrated Emma's disappearance, and they wouldn't hesitate to do it again. The real fight was just starting. Dr. Chen left them with more than just proof. She left them with a warning. Before departing, she pulled Victoria aside while Emma was examining the photographs. "Miss Sterling, the man who took your daughter. I've seen him on television over the years. He's powerful now, more powerful than he was then. Be very careful who you trust." After Dr. Chen left, Victoria sat with Emma on the couch, both of them still processing the magnitude of what they'd learned. Emma kept touching the photograph, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. "Mom," Emma said tentatively, testing the word. Victoria's heart soared and broke at the same time. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your mom. Why didn't you look for me? Why did you believe I was dead?" The question was inevitable, but it still cut deep. Victoria chose her words carefully. "Because a very powerful, very bad man made sure I would never find you. He convinced everyone, including me, that you had died. I mourned you every day for 18 years. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Is that why someone sent you that scary message? Because they don't want us to be together?" Victoria was amazed by Emma's perceptiveness. "Yes, but we're going to stop them." "How?" Victoria's phone rang before she could answer. It was Marcus, and his voice was urgent. "Victoria, we have a problem. Dr. Peterson died this morning. Heart attack, they're saying. But the timing is too convenient. Someone got to him before he could talk." Victoria felt a chill run through her. "Marcus, I think we're running out of time. Whoever is behind this is getting desperate. There's something else. I've been tracking financial records, and I found something interesting. Large payments were made from a political action committee to the hospital, to social services, even to some of the foster families Emma was placed with. Someone has been orchestrating this for years. Political Action Committee? Americans for Strong Leadership. It's one of Senator Richard Blackwood's primary funding sources." Victoria's blood turned to ice. Richard? After all these years, it was still Richard pulling the strings. Emma was watching Victoria's face carefully. "Who is it, Mum? Who took me away?" Victoria looked at her daughter, and made a decision that would change everything. "Emma, the man who separated us is someone I used to know, someone who thought he could control my life and make me disappear when I became inconvenient." "But why keep me alive? Why not just—" "Because murder leaves evidence," Victoria said grimly. "But making a child disappear into the foster system, that's almost impossible to trace, until now." Victoria's phone buzzed with another text. "The child is not safe with you. Return her to the system voluntarily, or face the consequences." This time, Victoria was ready. She forwarded the message to Marcus and typed back, "Try me." Within minutes, her phone rang. Unknown number. "Victoria." The voice was older now, but unmistakably Richard Blackwood. "Richard," she said coldly, putting the phone on speaker so Marcus could hear on the other line. "I see you've been busy. Playing house with a little street urchin. How touching." Emma's face went pale at the cruel words. But Victoria squeezed her hand reassuringly. "She's my daughter, Richard, the daughter you stole from me." "Prove it," he said with smug confidence. "You have no evidence that would hold up in court. And I have 18 years of documented proof that you're an unfit mother who abandoned her child." "Actually," Victoria said, "I have DNA evidence. Hospital records and witness testimony. Dr. Chen kept very detailed files." There was a pause. "Dr. Chen is an old woman with dementia. No one would believe her." "Maybe not," Victoria agreed. "But they'll believe the paper trail Marcus is building. Financial records showing payments to silence people. Records of your visits to the hospital. Phone records from that night 18 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Victoria. I'm a United States Senator. I have resources you can't imagine. And I'm a mother who just found her daughter after 18 years. You can't imagine what I'm willing to do to protect her." The child stays in the system where she belongs. She's broken, damaged goods. Look at her, 3 years on the streets, multiple failed foster placements. She'll never be anything more than what she is." Emma flinched at the words, but Victoria stood up, her voice deadly calm. "Emma is brilliant, brave and beautiful. She survived everything you put her through and came back to find me. That makes her stronger than you'll ever be." "You have 24 hours to return her voluntarily," Richard said. "After that, I'll have child services remove her by force, and this time she won't resurface." The line went dead. Emma looked up at Victoria with wide eyes. "He's going to take me away again, isn't he?" Victoria knelt down and took Emma's face in her hands. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Emma, I need you to be very brave. We're going to fight this, but it might get scary." "I've been scared before," Emma said with quiet dignity, "but I was always alone. Now I have you." Victoria pulled Emma close, making a silent vow. Richard Blackwood had underestimated her 18 years ago when she was young and naive. He was about to learn that a mother protecting her child was the most dangerous force in the world. But as they held each other, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that Richard had one more card to play. Something that could destroy everything they'd just found. Victoria knew they had less than 24 hours before Richard's threat became reality. As Emma slept that night, Victoria made calls to people she hadn't spoken to in years. Old contacts from her early days in finance, before she'd become the polished businesswoman everyone knew. People who understood that sometimes the law wasn't enough. At dawn, Marcus arrived with a duffel bag and grim expression. "We need to move. Now. I've been monitoring police scanners. There's already been a wellness check ordered on this address. They're coming." Victoria had prepared for this. She gently woke Emma, who came alert immediately with the survival instincts of someone who'd lived on the streets. "We have to go, sweetheart," Victoria said softly. "Remember what we talked about. Staying brave." Emma nodded, grabbing the small backpack Victoria had prepared for her. Inside were the photographs Dr. Chen had given them, some clothes, and the precious locket that had started everything. They left through the building's service entrance, Marcus leading them through a maze of underground parking and maintenance tunnels. Victoria had never seen this side of Manhattan, the hidden world beneath the gleaming surface. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, as they climbed into Marcus's nondescript sedan. "Somewhere safe," Victoria replied. "I have a friend who owes me a favor." The friend was Sarah Chen, Dr. Chen's daughter and a civil rights attorney who specialized in cases the system preferred to ignore. Her office was in Queens, far from Manhattan's power centers, in a building that looked abandoned from the outside, but housed some of the city's most dedicated advocates. "Victoria Sterling," Sarah said as they entered her cluttered office. "I wondered when you'd come calling. My mother told me about your situation." Sarah was in her 40s, with her mother's kind eyes, but steel in her voice that came from years of fighting impossible cases. She looked at Emma with recognition and compassion. "Hello, Emma. I've been waiting to meet you for a very long time." Emma stayed close to Victoria's side. "How do you know who I am?" "Because 18 years ago, my mother made me promise that if you ever resurfaced, I would help you get justice. She never forgave herself for what happened." Sarah led them to a back room that was clearly designed for clients who needed to disappear. "You can stay here as long as necessary, but Victoria, if we're going to fight Richard Blackwood, we need more than evidence. We need a strategy that he can't counter with money and influence." "What do you suggest?" Sarah smiled grimly. "We make this story too big to bury. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Emma, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your time in foster care." For the next hour, Emma recounted her experiences with a clarity that amazed Victoria. The child had an extraordinary memory for details, names, dates, locations. As she spoke, Sarah took notes with growing anger. "Victoria, this wasn't random placement," Sarah said finally. "Emma was deliberately moved between specific families, all of whom received payments from the same political action committee. They were keeping her moving to prevent anyone from getting too attached or asking too many questions." "But why keep me alive at all?" Emma asked. "If this man wanted me gone, why not just—" "Because," Victoria said, the pieces finally clicking together. He needed leverage over me. Richard always was a long-term planner. He knew that someday I might become powerful enough to threaten him. Having my daughter alive, hidden somewhere in the system, was his insurance policy. Sarah nodded. Classic political strategy. Keep your enemies close by keeping something they love closer. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. So I was like a weapon against my own mother. No, Victoria said firmly, pulling Emma close. You were never a weapon. You were always my daughter, even when I didn't know you were alive, and now you're my strength. Marcus had been working on his laptop throughout the conversation. I've got something, he announced. Financial records going back 18 years. Richard's been very careful, but money leaves traces. The same account that paid for Emma's foster care has been making regular payments to a private investigator. Someone who's been watching you, Victoria, for years. Victoria felt sick. He's been spying on me. More than that, this investigator has detailed reports on your business dealings, your relationships, even your therapy sessions after Emma's supposed death. Richard knew everything about your life. Emma looked up at Victoria with understanding beyond her years. That's how he knew you'd never try to have another baby. He knew losing me broke something in you. The observation was so perceptive, so heartbreakingly accurate, that Victoria had to fight back tears. Yes, sweetheart, losing you changed everything. But you found me anyway, Emma said with quiet pride, even when he tried to make sure you wouldn't. Sarah cleared her throat. This is all very touching, but we have a practical problem. Richard's deadline is in 16 hours. We need to act fast. What do you propose? Victoria asked. We go public, but not through normal channels. Richard controls too many of those. We do it through social media, through independent journalists, through people he can't silence. Sarah's eyes gleamed with strategic thinking. We make Emma's story viral before he can stop it. Is that safe for Emma? Safer than hiding, Sarah said. Once her story is public, Richard can't make her disappear again without everyone knowing who's responsible. Emma had been listening intently. What would I have to do? Tell your story, Sarah said simply. Show the world what happened to you. Let people see who you really are, not the damaged goods Richard wants them to believe, but a strong, intelligent girl who survived incredible hardship. Victoria looked at Emma, seeing her daughter truly for the first time, not as the baby she'd lost, not as the street child she'd found, but as the remarkable young person she'd become, despite everything. It's your choice, Emma, Victoria said. I'll support whatever you decide. Emma thought for a long moment, then straightened her shoulders with determination that reminded Victoria of herself at that age. I want to do it. I want people to know what he did, and I want other kids in the system to know that someone cares about them. Sarah smiled. Then let's bring down a senator. But as they began planning their strategy, none of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past hour, or the man inside making phone calls to Washington. Richard Blackwood was already moving his pieces into position for the final game. While Emma slept on the small cot in Sarah's safe room, Victoria and the team worked through the night building their case. Marcus had connections throughout the city, former cops, investigative journalists, and activists who understood that sometimes justice required working outside official channels. The key is timing, Sarah explained as she laid out documents across her desk. We need to release everything simultaneously. Evidence, testimony, and Emma's story. If we give Richard any warning, he'll find a way to discredit it all. Victoria studied the financial records Marcus had compiled. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Payments disguised as consulting fees, campaign contributions, and charitable donations, all flowing to people who'd participated in Emma's disappearance. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to a series of transactions. 3 days after Emma was born, Richard made a $50,000 donation to a private security firm. That same firm employed the men who took her from the hospital. And here, Sarah added, regular payments to the foster families. But notice this. Every time Emma started to bond with a family, or whenever someone asked too many questions, the payment stopped and she was moved. Victoria felt sick reading the clinical efficiency of it all. He treated her like a commodity, something to be managed and controlled. There's more, Marcus continued. I found the original hospital security footage. It was supposed to be destroyed. But the security company kept backup copies for insurance purposes. Victoria, we have video of Richard meeting with Dr. Peterson the night Emma was born. Victoria's hands shook as Marcus showed her the grainy footage on his laptop. There was Richard, 18 years younger but unmistakably him, handing Dr. Peterson an envelope in a hospital corridor. The audio is poor, but I had it enhanced, Marcus said. You can clearly hear Richard saying, make sure the mother never finds out she's alive. This is evidence of conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, Sarah said with satisfaction. Even Richard's connections won't protect him from this. But Victoria was studying another document, one that made her blood run cold. Sarah, look at this. Richard's been making payments to someone else, someone called Asset Management Solutions. Sarah frowned. I've heard that name before. They're a private military contractor. They don't manage assets. They eliminate problems. The implication hung heavy in the air. Victoria thought about the threatening texts, Dr. Peterson's convenient death, the feeling of being watched. He's not just trying to take Emma back, Victoria realized. He's planning to eliminate both of us. A sound from the next room made them all freeze. Emma was awake, standing in the doorway in pajamas that were too big for her, her hair tousled from sleep. I heard voices, she said quietly. Are you planning how to fight the bad man? Victoria wanted to protect Emma from the harsh realities they were discussing, but the child had already survived more than most adults. She deserved honesty. Yes, sweetheart. We're gathering evidence to show everyone what really happened. Emma walked over to the desk, studying the documents with surprising focus. This man, she said, pointing to a photograph of Richard, I've seen him before. Everyone went still. When? Victoria asked. About a year ago. I was at a foster home, the Kellys. They were nice. But I knew I wouldn't get to stay, because I never got to stay anywhere. This man came to their house one day. He talked to Mrs. Kelly in the kitchen while I was supposed to be watching TV, but I listened from the stairs. Emma's memory for details was remarkable. He told Mrs. Kelly that I was getting too comfortable and needed to be moved. Mrs. Kelly argued with him, said I was just a child and deserved stability, but he said I was part of a larger arrangement and couldn't be allowed to form permanent attachments. Victoria felt rage building in her chest. Richard hadn't just stolen Emma once. He'd been actively preventing her from finding happiness for years. What else did he say? Sarah asked gently. He said that someday, when the time was right, I might be useful for something important. That's why I had to be kept. What was the word? Accessible. Accessible, Victoria repeated, the full scope of Richard's plan becoming clear. He was keeping you ready to use against me whenever he needed to. Emma nodded. Mrs. Kelly tried to call someone after he left, but her phone didn't work. The next day, social services came and moved me to a different family. Mrs. Kelly was crying when I left. Marcus was already typing on his laptop. I can track down Mrs. Kelly. If she remembers the conversation, she could be a witness. We need to move fast, Sarah said. If Richard is bringing in military contractors, we're running out of time. Victoria looked at Emma, who was listening to everything with the serious expression of someone far older than her years. Emma, what I'm about to ask is very dangerous. Are you sure you want to help us fight this? Emma straightened her shoulders. Mum, I've been fighting my whole life. At least now I know why." The trust and determination in her daughter's voice gave Victoria strength she didn't know she possessed. "Then let's finish this." But as they worked on their battle plan, none of them saw the small tracking device that had been placed on Marcus's car, or the team of professionals who were already moving into position around the building. Richard Blackwood hadn't built a political career by leaving things to chance. He was about to remind them all why underestimating him was a fatal mistake. At 6 a.m., they launched their campaign. Sarah had connections with independent media outlets, activist networks, and social justice organizations across the country. Marcus had technical skills that ensured their evidence would be distributed to hundreds of locations simultaneously, making it impossible to suppress. But their secret weapon was Emma herself. Victoria sat beside her daughter as they recorded Emma's testimony in Sarah's office. The camera captured everything. Emma's intelligent green eyes, her quiet dignity, the way she spoke about her experiences without self-pity, but with unwavering honesty. "My name is Emma Rodriguez," she began, looking directly into the camera. "But that's not my real name. My real name is Emma Sterling, and this is my mother, Victoria Sterling. 18 years ago, a powerful man stole me from her and made everyone believe I was dead." Emma's natural eloquence and mature perspective made her testimony compelling in a way that no adult's account could match. She spoke about life on the streets, about foster families who cared but were powerless against the system, about never understanding why she could never find a permanent home. "I want other kids to know that they matter," Emma concluded, "that even when everyone tells you you're nobody, you're somebody to someone." It just took 18 years for me and my mum to find each other again. Within hours of posting, Emma's story had been shared thousands of times. The hashtag Finding Emma began trending. News outlets that had ignored Sarah's initial calls were suddenly demanding interviews. Victoria watched the numbers climb on social media with amazement. "People really care about this." "Of course they do," Sarah said. Emma's story touches something universal, the fear of losing a child, the hope of impossible reunions. But more than that, people are furious about corruption and abuse of power. By noon, Richard's office was issuing statements, denying any connection to the case. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the documentation too detailed. His denials only drew more attention to the story. Then, the unexpected happened. Other victims began coming forward. "Sarah, you need to see this," Marcus called from his computer. "We're getting messages from other families. Other children who disappeared into the foster system under suspicious circumstances. Other parents who were told their children died when they didn't." Victoria felt sick as she read the messages. This wasn't just about Emma. Richard's been doing this to other families too. "It makes sense," Sarah said grimly. "Politicians collect leverage wherever they can find it. A missing child here, a dead parent there, all tools to control people who might threaten them." Emma had been reading over Victoria's shoulder. "There are other kids like me out there?" "It looks that way, sweetheart." Emma's expression hardened with determination that reminded Victoria of herself. "Then we have to help them too." But their moment of hope was shattered by Marcus's urgent voice. "We have a problem, major problem. Turn on the news." On the television screen, a polished news anchor was speaking with practiced concern. In a developing story, authorities are investigating claims that a Manhattan businesswoman has kidnapped a troubled foster child as part of an elaborate hoax. Senator Richard Blackwood's office has provided evidence suggesting that Victoria Sterling is mentally unstable and has been stalking foster children for months. Victoria watched in horror as the screen showed her own photograph alongside the words "wanted for questioning" and "child abduction." "He's turning the story around," Sarah said with admiration and disgust. making you the villain and himself the concerned public servant trying to protect a vulnerable child. Emma grabbed Victoria's hand. They can't really arrest you, can they? You're my real mom. DNA evidence takes time to process officially, Sarah explained. And Richard's people have probably already questioned the lab's credibility. In the court of public opinion, he's creating reasonable doubt. Victoria's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered it on speaker. Victoria, you've made a serious mistake. Richard's voice was calm, confident. By tomorrow morning, you'll be in custody for kidnapping, fraud, and child endangerment. Emma will be returned to protective custody, and this time, she'll disappear into a facility where even I won't be able to find her. Oh, people know the truth now, Richard. You can't cover this up. Can't I? By tonight, there will be experts testifying about your history of mental illness following the tragic loss of your child 18 years ago. There will be evidence of your obsession with foster children, your attempts to replace your dead daughter. Emma will be portrayed as a victim you've manipulated and exploited. Victoria felt the walls closing in. Richard had anticipated their strategy and prepared counterattacks. What do you want? Surrender yourself. Admit this was all a fantasy brought on by grief and mental illness. Let Emma return to care. And I'll ensure you receive treatment instead of prison time. Never. Then you've chosen prison. And Emma has chosen a lifetime of institutions. Think carefully about whether your pride is worth destroying her future. The line went dead. Emma looked up at Victoria with fierce loyalty. I don't care what he says. I know who you are. But Victoria could see the doubt creeping into Sarah's eyes, the worry in Marcus's expression. Richard's counterattack was working. He was making their truth look like delusion. We need something bigger, Sarah said finally. Something he can't spin or deny. Victoria thought about everything they'd learned, all the evidence they'd gathered. Then an idea began forming. Dangerous, desperate, but possibly their only chance. What if we force him to prove his version of events? She said slowly. What if we make him come to us? How? Victoria looked at Emma, seeing her own determination reflected in her daughter's eyes. We do something he won't expect. Something that will expose him once and for all. But even as she spoke, Victoria knew they were running out of time. Richard's influence was vast, his resources nearly unlimited. Their window of opportunity was closing fast. Victoria's plan was audacious and dangerous. Instead of hiding from Richard's accusations, they would force a public confrontation where he would have to defend his lies in real time. We're going to do a live press conference, Victoria announced. Not hidden in some back room, but on the steps of City Hall, with every news outlet in the city present. Sarah looked skeptical. Victoria, the moment you appear in public, you'll be arrested. Richard's people have probably already put out warrants. Not if we do it right. Marcus, how long would it take to set up a live stream that couldn't be shut down? Marcus was already thinking. If I use multiple platforms simultaneously, create backup servers, route through international proxies. Maybe 20 minutes of guaranteed airtime before they could stop it. 20 minutes is enough, Victoria said. Emma, this is going to be scary. Are you ready? Emma nodded with quiet courage. I trust you, Mum. The plan was simple, but risky. They would announce the press conference publicly, giving Richard exactly 30 minutes' notice. Not enough time for him to organize a complex response, but enough to ensure he would be watching. Then, instead of defending themselves against his accusations, they would go on the offensive. At 3 p.m., Sarah sent out the announcement. Victoria Sterling and Emma Rodriguez will address allegations of fraud and kidnapping in a live statement at City Hall at 3:30 p.m. The public is invited to hear the truth. Marcus had positioned cameras and streaming equipment around the City Hall steps, creating multiple angles and backup systems. By 3:25, a crowd had gathered, reporters, curious citizens, and notably several black SUVs with government plates. Victoria and Emma walked up the steps together, hand in hand. Emma looked small beside the imposing government building, but her posture was straight, and her voice was clear when she stepped to the microphone. "My name is Emma Sterling," she began, deliberately using Victoria's surname. 18 years ago, Senator Richard Blackwood stole me from my mother and spent my entire childhood making sure we could never find each other. The crowd murmured with surprise. This wasn't the mentally ill woman and manipulated child they'd been told to expect. Victoria stepped forward. "I have evidence that Senator Blackwood orchestrated a conspiracy involving hospital staff, social services, and foster care agencies to fake my daughter's death and hide her in the system." She began displaying documents on large poster boards Marcus had prepared, financial records, photographs, witness statements. The evidence was overwhelming and presented with the clarity of someone who had spent decades building business cases. But the real bombshell came when Emma stepped forward again. "Senator Blackwood visited me personally last year," Emma said into the microphone. "He told my foster mother that I was part of a larger arrangement and could never be allowed to form permanent attachments. I recorded that conversation." The crowd went silent. Emma held up a small digital recorder, the same device she'd used to record sounds on the street for comfort during her homeless years. Marcus had already connected the device to the sound system. Richard's voice filled the air, clear and unmistakable. "The girl is part of a larger arrangement. She cannot be allowed to form permanent attachments. She must remain accessible for future use." The recording continued with Mrs. Kelly's protests and Richard's cold responses about maintaining assets and political necessities. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and explosive. Reporters began shouting questions, cameras flashed, and several people in the government vehicles made urgent phone calls. But Victoria wasn't finished. "Senator Blackwood has spent 18 years using my daughter as leverage against me, moving her between foster homes to prevent her from finding stability, keeping her hungry and homeless to ensure she remained vulnerable. This is not the action of a public servant. This is the behavior of a criminal." As if on cue, police cars began arriving, their sirens cutting through the noise of the crowd. Victoria had expected this. Richard would try to have her arrested to end the press conference. But Emma stepped closer to the microphone one more time. "I know there are other children like me," she said, her young voice carrying across the square. "Kids who were taken from their families, who were told they weren't wanted, who were moved around the system to prevent them from finding love. Senator Blackwood did this to all of us, and if we don't stop him now, he'll keep doing it." The police officers who had been approaching the podium slowed their advance. Some removed their hats, clearly uncomfortable with arresting a child who was obviously telling the truth. Then something extraordinary happened. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. "My son!" she called out. "My son Michael was taken 20 years ago. They told me he died in a car accident, but there was never a body." Another voice joined hers. "My daughter Sarah disappeared from the hospital after a supposed gas leak." More families began stepping forward, each with similar stories of children who had vanished into the system or been declared dead under suspicious circumstances. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were participating in a mass revelation of systemic corruption. Victoria looked at Emma with amazement and pride. Her daughter hadn't just told her own story. She had given voice to dozens of other families who had been silenced for years. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by the arrival of additional black SUVs. Men in expensive suits were emerging, speaking urgently into phones and pointing at the podium. "He's here," Marcus said into Victoria's earpiece. "Richard just pulled up. Back entrance." Victoria's pulse quickened. The final confrontation was about to begin. Emma grabbed her hand. "Whatever happens, Mom, we told the truth. People heard us." Victoria squeezed her daughter's hand, drawing strength from this remarkable child who had survived so much and still had the courage to fight for others. "Yes, we did, sweetheart. And the truth has power he can't control." But as Richard Blackwood's security detail began moving through the crowd toward the podium, Victoria realized the real battle was just beginning. Senator Richard Blackwood approached the podium with the confidence of a man who had never lost a political battle. Even at 68, he cut an imposing figure, silver-haired, perfectly dressed, with the kind of authority that had dominated Washington for decades. The crowd parted as he walked, some with curiosity, others with disgust. The reporters immediately turned their cameras toward him, sensing that the story was about to reach its climax. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of countless speeches, "what you've witnessed here today is a tragedy. A mentally unstable woman, consumed by grief over the loss of her child 18 years ago, has manipulated a vulnerable foster child into participating in an elaborate fantasy." He gestured toward Emma with what appeared to be compassion. "This poor child has been coached to repeat stories that have no basis in reality. The woman calling herself her mother has no legal claim to her whatsoever." Victoria felt Emma's hand tighten in hers, but the child remained steady, watching Richard with the same careful attention she'd learned to survive on the streets. "Furthermore," Richard continued, "I have here a court order removing this child from an unstable environment and returning her to proper care." He held up official-looking documents. "Miss Sterling, you are in violation of federal laws regarding child welfare and face immediate arrest." The crowd murmured uncertainly. Richard's performance was convincing, his authority seemingly unshakable. For a moment, Victoria wondered if their evidence would be enough against such polished manipulation. Then Emma stepped to the microphone. "Senator Blackwood," she said, her young voice clear and direct, "if you've never met me before today, how do you know about the scar on my left shoulder?" Richard paused, clearly not expecting to be questioned by a child. The foster care records contain medical information." "The scar isn't in any medical records," Emma continued calmly. "It's from when I fell off a bike at the Kelly house. Mrs. Kelly cleaned it up herself and never reported it because she was afraid social services would say she wasn't taking proper care of me." Victoria watched with amazement as her daughter, this remarkable 8-year-old, began systematically dismantling Richard's credibility. "And if you don't know me personally," Emma pressed on, "how did you know I was afraid of thunderstorms? You mentioned that to Mrs. Kelly when you visited, said I was emotionally unstable because of my storm phobia." Richard's composure was beginning to crack. "The records indicate." "There are no records of my storm phobia," Emma said firmly, "because I'm not afraid of storms. I love them. I told Mrs. Kelly they remind me of my mother singing to me. You must have confused me with some other child you were controlling." The crowd was now completely focused on Emma, this small girl who was outmaneuvering a United States senator with simple truth and clear logic. "Emma," Richard said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "you're a confused child who has been manipulated." "I'm a child who remembers everything," Emma interrupted, "including the conversation I recorded when you visited last year, including the man you brought with you who waited outside, including what you said about my mother when you thought I couldn't hear." Emma looked directly at Richard, her green eyes unwavering. "You said my mother was getting too powerful, too successful, that someday you might need to remind her who was really in control, that I was your insurance policy against her." Richard's face had gone pale. Around him, his security detail shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that their boss was being exposed by a child. Victoria stepped forward, seeing her opening. "Richard, 18 years ago, You convinced me my daughter was dead because you couldn't afford for your political career to be damaged by our relationship. But you didn't have her killed. You had her hidden. Turned into a weapon you could use against me whenever you needed to. You have no proof of these wild accusations, Richard said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Actually, I do. Victoria nodded to Marcus, who began projecting additional documents onto screens around the plaza. Financial records showing payments to everyone involved in Emma's disappearance, phone records from that night 18 years ago, and testimony from Dr. Peterson before his convenient death. Peterson was a dying man with dementia, Richard countered desperately. Then explain this, Victoria said, as Marcus played a new audio recording. Dr. Peterson's final confession, recorded just days before his death, describing in detail how Richard had threatened his family to ensure his cooperation. The crowd was now openly hostile toward Richard. Reporters were shouting questions, and several people were demanding his arrest. But Emma wasn't finished. She walked directly up to Richard, looking small and fragile beside his imposing figure. "Senator," she said quietly, "do you remember what you told me the last time you saw me, when I was living in that group home downtown?" Richard stared down at her, trapped. If he admitted to seeing her, he would be confessing to the conspiracy. If he denied it, Emma would expose him as a liar. "You told me," Emma continued, "that I should stop hoping anyone would ever want me permanently, that I was damaged goods and would never have a real family. You said the best I could hope for was to be useful to someone important someday." Tears were streaming down faces in the crowd. The cruelty of those words, spoken to a vulnerable child, crystallized everything evil about Richard's actions. "But you were wrong," Emma said, her voice growing stronger. "I do have a family. I have a mother who loves me, and I am useful, not to you, but to all the other children you've hurt, because now everyone knows what you are." Richard looked around at the hostile crowd, at the cameras broadcasting his downfall live to the world, at the child who had just destroyed his career with simple truth. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Victoria. "Yes, it is," Emma replied, stepping protectively in front of her mother. "We're not afraid of you anymore." As police officers finally moved forward, this time to arrest Richard Blackwood for conspiracy and child endangerment, Victoria pulled Emma into her arms. They had won, but more importantly, they had found each other, and this time no one would ever separate them again. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the doorway of what was now officially Emma's bedroom, watching her daughter arrange books on shelves that finally belonged to her. The legal adoption had been finalized just that morning, though in their hearts they'd been family since that first night at the restaurant. "Mom," Emma called, holding up a drawing she'd made. "Do you think this looks like us?" The picture showed 2 figures holding hands under a bright sun, with the word "forever" written in Emma's careful handwriting across the top. Victoria felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever she realized how much time they'd lost and how grateful she was for the time they'd found. "It's perfect, sweetheart. Just like you." The trial had been swift once Richard's empire of lies began collapsing. Faced with overwhelming evidence and Emma's devastating testimony, he'd pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He would spend the next 15 years in federal prison, his political career destroyed, his reputation in ruins. But the real victory wasn't Richard's downfall, it was what came after. Emma's courage in speaking out had inspired other victims to come forward. The investigation had uncovered a network of corruption that reached across multiple states, involving dozens of officials who had participated in separating families for political gain. 17 children had been reunited with their birth families, and countless others had found justice for years of suffering. "Mrs. Kelly called today," Emma announced from her desk, where she was working on homework that actually mattered now. Homework for a school where she would stay, where teachers knew her name and cared about her future. What did she say? She's adopting twins now, brother and sister who were almost separated by the system. She says I inspired her to keep fighting for kids who need families. Victoria smiled, remembering the kind foster mother who had tried to protect Emma from Richard's manipulation. Mrs. Kelly had become an advocate for foster care reform, using her experience with Emma to push for changes that would prevent future abuses. That's wonderful news. Emma looked up from her homework with those extraordinary green eyes that had started everything. Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't asked for your leftovers that night? Victoria sat on the edge of Emma's bed, considering the question seriously. I think somehow, some way, we would have found each other. Love like ours doesn't just disappear, it finds a way. Even after 18 years? Especially after 18 years. Emma came over and curled up beside Victoria, still small enough to fit perfectly under her mother's arm. I used to dream about having a real family, but I never imagined it would feel like this. What does it feel like? Safe, Emma said immediately, and peaceful. Like I can stop running now. Victoria kissed the top of Emma's head, breathing in the scent of the strawberry shampoo Emma had chosen because it smells like happiness. Such a simple thing, choosing your own shampoo, but for Emma it represented the freedom to make decisions about her own life. You never have to run again, Victoria promised. This is your home. I'm your mother. Nothing will ever change that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint Emma's room in shades of gold and pink. Victoria had had the room redecorated in Emma's favorite colors, deep purple walls with silver stars, a reading nook by the window, and enough space for all the art supplies Emma was discovering she loved. Mom, Emma said quietly. Yes, sweetheart. Thank you for not giving up. Even when you thought I was gone forever. Victoria felt tears threaten, but they were good tears now, tears of gratitude instead of loss. Thank you for surviving everything they put you through. Thank you for being strong enough to find your way back to me. Emma pulled back to look at Victoria seriously. We found each other. That's what family does. Outside Emma's window, the city sparkled with lights. Millions of people living their own stories of loss and hope, struggle and triumph. Somewhere out there, Victoria knew, other families were fighting to stay together, other children were waiting to be found. But here, in this room, in this moment, two hearts that had been separated by cruelty and greed had finally come home to each other. Emma yawned and snuggled closer to Victoria. Will you sing me the star song, the real version? Victoria smiled, remembering the lullaby she'd made up during her pregnancy, the one Emma had somehow remembered through all the years of separation. Twinkle, twinkle, little heart, Victoria sang softly. Mommy loves you from the start, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little heart, we will never be apart. As Emma drifted off to sleep in her mother's arms, Victoria made a silent promise to all the children still lost in systems designed to separate rather than unite. Emma's story would not be forgotten. Her courage would continue to light the way for others searching for their own way home. Because sometimes miracles happen. Sometimes love wins. And sometimes a simple question, can I eat your leftovers, can change two lives forever. Victoria Sterling had found her daughter. Emma Sterling had found her mother. They had found their family. And they were finally, truly, completely home.